So I think when you're out there on the high ocean and in the inland waters, that no doubt you've seen a few critters, perhaps even in your backyard. So I thought perhaps we could maybe shed a little bit of light on some of those animals that you may or may not know. Some of you may not last, and I don't think we have enough time to get to the rodents. Darn. I was really hoping to get to the rodents, you know, those furry little chewers, you know, while you're here, they're busy there. That's your home. So we'll be looking at some of the hoofed animals, right, that you probably also are pretty familiar with, deer. And how many of you like the carnivores? So basically that's our three major groups. I usually teach this at Western Extended Ed as a 3-part, 2 hours each series. So don't worry though, I won't go that long. And then we do a field trip. I think some of the offerings that I have this spring were sent out maybe in the membership. Maybe you got to read some of that. Thank you very much, Andres. And hey, I do handyman work during the day to pay the bills. Strong back, weak mind. I can do your job. All right, so I'll probably throw in a few pop quizzes. Do you mind? Did that go over well last time? Just to keep you awake and, you know, measure your savvy on animals. So in lieu of that gentleman that wasn't able to make it, I thought that perhaps, how many of you sailed or been up the Inside Passage into this zone? You recognize some of the markers here? So we're down here sitting on our tush, and we're coming up, you know, inside Vancouver Island, on up the Inside Passage. So this map actually shows us the protected area, which includes Haida Gwaii, you know, in these marine waters. But the Great Bear Rainforest is this section here, right here, which you know, protects the last remaining large section of temperate coastal rainforest in the world. I don't know if you knew that, but in your backyard, we essentially have 66% of the what's left in the world, right here. And, you know, of course, you know, there's companies and we all use wood products that would love to cut this, but fortunately, at least in theory, it's protected, okay? So that's the outer border. And if you haven't spent much time getting out in old growth forest, where there's no trails, I can assure you that after a big meal like this, you'd probably want to, if you encountered a tree literally bigger than this, when I worked on the Owl Crew at Olympic Park, do I want to try and climb over that? No, it's much easier to go under, right? Or you could use them as bridges across the valleys, looking for spotted owls at that time. But when you do get off the trail, have you ever read any of Gary Snyder's work? Oh yeah. So here's a deep ecologist that was considered a beatnik poet back in the 60s and 70s, worked on some of the lookouts up here in North Cascades area. But he writes a great book, and one chapter I like is on the path off the trail. And that's when the real discoveries begin. Anyone can pad down the trail, and are you likely to find anything rare and exceptional? Probably not. I mean, so many people have been through, and we all collect things, shiny, you know, whatever. Kind of like some animals, they like shiny things as well. But this is an amazingly diverse area where there's many niches for different animals, many of which, how many of you have seen bobcat before, or lynx? Oh, very good. How about cougar, have you seen? Oh yeah, a few.
Just the tail section.
Just the tail, okay. Half the animal.
Yeah, going the other way.
Yeah, well, one time I was perched up on a leaner like this, and one went right through the salmonberry right below, and it's kind of like you can watch the leaves. And then when you're out off trail again, you'll see big elk tracks, and right on top of it, as big as your hand, there's a cougar track right on top of it. And one time, if we're telling stories for a moment, just a little divergence, my brother and I were hiking in Glacier National Park, and you know, there's grizzlies there, and we came up the trail, and here was this, is this okay? Is it PC after dinner? It's after dinner. Big pile, right? Still steaming.
So you knew it's right here.
Very close. I said to my brother, maybe we'll go back down the trail. So anyway, if you haven't had an encounter with a black bear with the cubs, well, maybe you'll probably want to read. I have a friend that did 50 years worth of research on grizzly bears, and that's a whole nother animal. You know, some people think that, you know, you can get by with some basic knowledge on black bears, But when they're standing up with cubs like this is one where you want to, not really challenge them whatsoever. And what's interesting in the Great Bear Forest is there are black bears, there are grizzlies there, but what's interesting is that 1 in 10 will actually, genetically, it's a real recessive trait, end up being a white pelaged one. And maybe you've heard of the spirit bear, okay? And it's, big medicine. I used to work for the National Park Service, and on our logo on the shoulder patch, at the bottom is the white bison. And they figured that only occurred about 1 in 10,000 to have a completely all, white one. And so maybe 1 in 10 black bears in the Great Bear Forest can turn out to look like this.
Wow.
And I've been up and down the Inside Passage, maybe, and many, I'm sure a lot of you have as well, and you can look and you can look and you might not ever see one. But if you talk to the indigenous people there, and if we go far enough back, we all are indigenous people, and they'll talk to you about this bear that's there. So it's a kind of a curious, it's not an albino, right? So if we were to look at Gloger's rule, okay, if you look up Gloger, Gloger''S, Gloger's rule, we'll talk about melanin saturation, and you can have in damp communities like we live in, have you noticed the rains here? Well, it was dumping this morning, wasn't it? Whoa. So that you'll have more melanin saturated organisms, whether it's their fur, their feathers, whatever. And when you go east over the crest of the Cascades or into the higher interior, then you have a much drier situation, and that will tend to favor a more pale plumaged or pelage, the fur of the animal. You with me? So you can look it up when you get home. I could have put it in here, but I didn't want to get too tech for you, okay? So, you can have a whole variation. So this is towards the paler end, right? And what's interesting, they have in this Great Bear Forest, it should also be in the title, a coastal wolf that's there. And these are very interesting because 20% of their diet is, guess what? Come on.
Fish.
Very good. Salmon, right? 20%. As we go into the interior, it decreases with the more interior race of gray wolf, right, timber wolf, to about maybe 15%. Go further, and fish are only about 10% of the diet. And so you can see pretty good photographs of them, capturing, salmon that you would love to have on the hook as well. Here's a big male here, humpy it looks like, huh? So that's a big part of their diet. So I just thought I'd talk like I was the Great Bear Forest presenter for a few moments. Wet your whistle and your interest. Maybe they'll be able to get him back in the future. We'll see. But as we do go into the Coast Range or the Cascades or the Olympics, up into the higher elevations, we can find hoofed animals that occur there. When you look at this at large, both the elevation, the exposures or aspects, right? Precipitation, pHs, on and on, create all these unique little niches, which given enough time, particularly if you are a hunter-gatherer, you too would get very savvy about your patch, right? And that would become your niche breath where you would live and you would be a specialist. Yeah? So, I'll show you in a moment here how varied the deer are up and down the coast. You say, well, I know them all, but do you? And so if you are going to hunt and gather, you actually become, just by nature, a naturalist, an ecologist. Now in some circles, saying you're an environmentalist might not buy you a whole lot of dessert, but when you think about it, at the base level, we are all environmentalists or ecologists, because guess what? If you leave out that door without anything else, I hope you'll go home with the fact that a diverse ecology is what fuels your rich economy. And there's no changing that, okay? You don't have to agree, you don't say, well, that doesn't affect me, but guess what? Everything in this room, on your back, in your pocket, came from nature, huh? So learning about, what happens, and maybe not writing in what we would call history books, but telling your stories in pictographs, petroglyphs, etc., there's a lot of information that's been there for a long time looking at this relationship we have with other mammals and animals on the planet. So, tracking 101, here we go. You guys ready? Now there's probably some expertise in this room, so I can engage you. So, who's the expert tracker here? Did any of you take a mammalogy class in college? I can't believe it. Here I heard some great things about the Corinthian Yacht Club. Maybe I'm at the wrong place to present it tonight, but it was a great dinner. Thank you. All righty. So snow, you may not like it, but it's a great, canvas for us for tracking. I will take my group out in a few days at low tide, but I'm wishing that we had some softer sand around here because it would take better, impressions. Okay. Some resources, I pulled about half a dozen of them out of this presentation before I got here and put them at the end so you don't have to wade through. But this is a pretty good book and a recent one by a Northwest person if you need a reference. And here's an even simpler one. I have a few up here at the front table before you leave that you could stick easily into your boat, or your knapsack for the day. And who knows, you just might come across something, you'll be happy you had a reference. Because you can't call me. You can email me, but it might be a few hours, right, Mary, Vic, Andres, before I get back with you. So I think this is appropriate, so. Something to contemplate, huh? So, here we are. Now that we're a little lower center of gravity, that was a good dinner, like I said. And thinking about, okay, and it's interesting, they've done experiments where they take your domestic cat or dog and put it back out in the wild environment. And you know what? If it's going to survive, what does it do? It doesn't prance all over like this like it's at home. I know where the food and the water is. No. They stop all of a sudden and say, oh, darn it. I've been put out and I may never get home. What am I going to do? And automatically they switch back to their roots and they just start dialing in their ears. I can't take a footstep here because I'm wasting energy unless I can detect some food. They get savvy very quick. Your dog or your cat, put them out there. And that's what they're going to do. Because now, hey, they got to survive. So stalking, very carefully, using all your senses and becoming a tracker. So those big feet, right, as we know. What was that animal a moment ago? What was that animal?
I was going to ask, is it a bobcat or a lynx?
It's a lynx, okay, with those huge feet, little slightly larger animal. And I'm trying to get myself, I have a professor friend at Western, and his daughters now are working on the lynx project over in the Poseidon, okay, and they know where dens are. And also on the Wolverine project, the first image I had, the title page there, right? Because I want to get to see those animals, right? And guess what? Probably about 8 years ago, I was snowshoeing up at Yak Peak, north of Hope, BC, and I encountered a slide of an animal coming down, and I got out my trusty Rusties. I always carry my tape measure. Why? To measure not only the width, but the length of the tracks. And I'll tell you this again in a minute, so you'll get it down. The straddle is the distance between the tracks, and the stride length. Because this animal had slid down, I figured about 1,200 feet down the side of the mountain. I wrote a poem I called Gulo Gulo for the Wolverine, right? Gulo Gulo stands in old, country language for glutton, but they're mostly scavengers. But it had slid down and it so enjoyed. We've seen pictures of river otters doing this, that it galloped back up to the top of the mountain to do it again, right? So it was very cool. And guess what? I sent this observation with photos. I didn't send my poem. And some of these Wolverine biologists said, well, we haven't even seen this, and they're the authorities, right? So any one of you in this room can, turn into a tracker. So when you know that snowshoe hares, in hopping along, throw their larger hind feet past their ears, you see those in the track, and then their front forepaws are following. Everyone see that? So when you start studying this, you're going to get into this. Tonight you won't be able to sleep, I can imagine. I hope so, okay? And it's very cool when you get to see the animal who's also doing some tracking, right? I remember as a little butch-haired kid back in, Kalamazoo, Michigan, about 5, 6 years of age, I looked out one frosty morning, and there were little tracks, and it looked like a baby human had walked there. And it was the hind foot of the old raccoon, right? Rocky raccoon, right down the sidewalk. So here they are. Now remember, you and I are visual species. Our last program last month, and we use our hearing a lot. Birds are wired that way. But mammals are completely, into their nose, into the ears, and maybe seeing is okay. But you know, if you're a dog, one of our domestic dogs, they're always scanning this lower strata. Many of these animals don't see color either. It's a black and white world, and so they're scanning down low. They used to then extrapolate, quote scientists, and say, oh, fish don't see colors either. But then they finally waked up on, why are some of these fish colorful if they can't see each other? That was dumb. Anyway, think outside the box and you'll be surprised what you'll know. So here we are sniffing these tracks, right? Because, hey, we can tell how long it's been since that one came along. Is it our gender? Isn't it? Do we care? I don't know. So there's some pretty good plasticized things, good for yachters to take on the boat, showing the animal and the critter and a few basic facts about those. Village Books and others carry those. Now, be careful when you're looking for resources online. If you check this carefully, this is an alertness test, you'll notice some animals that probably you're not going to encounter in the Pacific Northwest. Are you reading carefully?
Crocodile.
Penguins, giraffe, crocodile, tiger. Where's another good one? Rhino, that's a good one. Okay, we don't want this material. All right, let's get it to where it needs to be. But I like this, but you don't always see this. If you've noticed in the mud and snow, you don't always see the claw marks, okay? Which is handy because, grizzlies with their long claws, if you can see that, that would help you right off the bat separate it from a black bear, right? Up there in the upper left, claws are much shorter. But all these felidae, the felids, the cats, don't show claws, because why? Retracted, right? Retracted. But then all the gray wolves, etc., they'll show some toes, our common domestic dog as well. So just to kind of get you warmed up to this, you have that all memorized now? But this is in a perfect world. How many of you live in a perfect world? Oh, you do. Lucky you. So when you see tracks, they always look like this, and they're all going that direction? Well, I'm kind of sorry for you, but anyway. And then it gets more confusing. And they've got these itty tiny little animals that you can barely see in these massive tracks. So you too, if you're going to become a tracker and love wildlife, you're going to carry, I actually like the old style folding wooden ruler. Why? Because I can lay out part of it for the track going this way, and then I can have part of it bent this way to get the width of the track. You can have one of those fancy tape measures, but it's handy to be able to get the width and the length at the same time. All right, so out in the real world, maybe right out here at low tide or wherever you live, when you've got this kind of thing going on here, so this is fairly soft, and we would say that this animal is probably, maybe bounding along. And why would I say that? Pop quiz number 1.
Long stride.
Pardon?
Long stride.
Yeah, and what else?
Yep. Grouping.
What? Grouping? Yeah. And then what else? We're seeing this dew claws, right? Which are higher up on the track. We don't see those usually showing unless we're in deeper snow or mud. The dew claws showing here. Very good. So this is what I think is handy. I don't have it on me, but usually if I don't have my ruler with me, which I mostly do, I use my Swiss Army knife. Having a size reference in your photographs of tracks, probably all of you have an iPhone, and so you're better equipped than any of the earlier naturalists, because they'd have to get out their sketchbook. But if you don't include a size reference for the width or length, then you don't really know, because so many tracks are pretty similar. And you may not get those perfect tracks that you always get when you're in the field. Okay, you might only get part of it. And look at this right here. I'm talking to my partner, she's down in Brazil, and she has an opossum in the fig tree in her backyard. And I said, if you look closely, look at how similar they are to the human hand or the primate for grasping. And then with that prehensile tail that an opossum has for hanging, perfect for climbing in trees. I wish I'd had that as a kid, man. All right, so how about this one? Have you ever seen this one before? Okay, she's nodding yes. And what is it? No idea. But we don't see a distinction between the forepaws, right, and the hind paws at all. They're all together. But we do see remnant of a little bit of a tail dragging through, correct? Yeah. Also, this animal is doing, we could lump this. All the tracking books that I can show you up here and at home, they all have their style. And it's real interesting to see how they all see it a little bit differently. So it's one of those conundrums. You need to have all the field guides to really get most of the information. So some call this a bounder. And your weasels are bounders. Squirrels, when they're running, are bounders, right? And they'll usually show a little tail like that. Yeah? So in your own minds, I'm not saying you should follow my system or anybody else's, but develop a system so that at a glance, because sometimes your experiences with another life form is just very ephemeral, is it not? And if you don't know what to look for, and if you memorize the things that are unique to that species or that genus, then bingo, you can always say with confidence to, you know, whoever asks you, well, did you do the, yes, of course I did. So here's some of that more tail drag we get through here, and a webbed foot we can see in between the toes as well. So something like, what would you guess this could be?
Otter.
Pardon?
Otter?
Yeah, but I don't think they'd show so much webbing on the hind foot. It was a good stab. Now, you're experts on riparian habitat, right? Where the water meets the land. And it's, you know, Washington State and BC and these areas have a huge amount of riparian habitat. And knowing that this animal, you know, is going to be in that. You know, I grew up in Michigan, and the world's longest predator-prey study is on Isle Royale National Park up in Lake Superior. It's been going, what, 60-some years. But I think it's flawed. And maybe the original study design people didn't consider this, but it's about wolves and moose. But without ponds created by beavers, moose wouldn't be there foraging. So I think beavers should have been in the story as well. So I'll rest my case, right? Hi, can you see okay? Am I blocking you? I'm sorry. Oh, it's too hot, yeah. So just as a little reminder again, then on the left side showing claws must be the Canidae family, right, the dogs, and the cat's over here on the right-hand side. You with me? And a little bit of difference in the hind pad here too. And again, it won't always be perfect, although we'd like it to be. And how about this track? Yeah, how about this? You gotta have a little fun, huh? I like this. And then, you know, the other hominids that have wandered around, and it'd be nice, you know, if there was a raccoon or two coming up here. What are they doing? I love it. Ooh, perfect after dinner subject, right? How many of you are scatologists? How many of you want to be? Okay, well, it's a specialized area that you won't have a lot of competition in, and yeah. But these are all sign, right? If we're going to talk about tracks as one type of sign, we should talk about this kind of sign and others. And look at how different they are. And it's very easy. You could do a dichotomous key right here just based on the knowledge you do or don't have thus far, okay? And that is, when you find fur in the scat, is that a vegetarian? Okay, so that's be a carnivore, right? And you see gray wolf in there, and you see coyote, you know, other animals as well. Okay, and then we've got a lot of plant material. Also, seeing how we're getting to know each other, I can always tell you mustelids, right? Mink, you know, weasels, etc., because they do DQ twirls, you know, with their ends, you know. It's very distinct. Now, this might not be for everybody, but I'll move on if it's not. Okay, I get it. Give you some straight faces, but if you need reference material, it's out there. A great gift for the grandkids. Come on. So here's my only other big plug for environmentalism and preserving our beautiful sailing and motoring areas is that, you know, all animals or mammals on the planet leave sign, do they not? This sign is at the base of Dungeness Spit. And I think it's very telling because this is the stuff that's washed up on that beautiful beach that you and I go out to enjoy. And, you know, we're all part of this culture. And so I think we can do better. And, you know, if you're learning some things, you can educate because here's a six-pack ring that's going to last 450 years out there. So that's a long time, these plastics, right? And even some things that, like an old leather shoe, 25 to 40 years probably be out there washing around in the surf. Something to think about. That's my low point here as far as, you know, but I think it's a point that needs to be made. If I don't say it, who's going to, huh? And so here, You've got a little wood to whittle on here. There's all kinds of sign, and this was right adjacent to a beautiful pond, and it's amazing. They don't have a clue where that tree's going to fall. Like some of the people I used to work on trail crew with the Park Service. I mean, there was some strange dudes on some fires I fought on too, with eyes going all different directions, and they're running a chainsaw, and they're looking at you wide-eyed. Whoa, scary people. And maybe, you know, you might say, well, David, he talked on birds last time. This is about mammals. But primary excavators like woodpeckers, etc., create some great habitat for not only taking a siesta in the afternoon if you're a nocturnal mammal, but maybe even breeding. So some of these larger cavities. So primary excavators and secondary users are recycling. So here was my example of taking a few notes. But again, look at, the person did not include any size reference whatsoever. And this was a fun doodle project, but as far as empowering you by taking some good notes, I would want to include, you know, some widths and lengths of these tracks. All handy stuff to know. And any one of you in here, I say this seriously, if you're out on a meander, I have a climbing friend, he's very good on his geology, and he was up, this was probably about 10 to 12, it could have been as many as 15 years ago, I lose track. We had a huge November with lots of rain here. And up the Nooksack, there was a huge landslide, 2 or 3 actually, that came right off the mountainside. And the soil was so saturated and lubricated enough, you know, angle on it, it slid out. So he went up there and wandered around. And it's some of our same chuckanut sandstone that we find out here, you know, from, you know, Susha area all the way up towards Black Mountain. It's old lakeshore and river bottom rock from, they figure, about 55 to 49 million years ago. But as he was wandering around at all this organic soil and this glacial alluvial stuff slid off, he found this track group over here on the left. And you say, well, yeah, it looks like some birds, you know, from 50 million years ago. But the foot was about 12 inches across with the 3-toe look. Wouldn't you take note of a foot-long track up there in the sandstone, even with these little ones around there? And sure enough, he took it to Dr. George Musto up at Western, and he said, this is the best find on the whole West Coast ever made by an amateur. And my friend Keith barely got his name in the article, of course, you know. And this is down in Oregon at Diatrama, but this animal stands taller than anyone in this room, over 6 feet, and they estimate it's about 380 pound animal. And it's always made out like many of the animals of that time period as, you know, being a vicious, savage animal. Well, it was probably eating seeds, nuts, and berries and things, right? So Diatrama is, actually you can see this for yourself and read up at Western, the first story there of Huxley in the geology department. They, I don't know, I forget, it was over a ton. So my friend, you know, found it. So then they got some money and they helicoptered it down to the highway. They put it on a truck and they brought it up here. So that specimen is a unique thing you could see. While we're on tracks, you know, you just might find one yourself. There it is on the far left over there with that human and a few other critters of the time. So a lot of people don't realize that mammals were actually around in the Triassic period before the Jurassic. Small mammals that you know, were eating plants as well as carnivores eating animals. So that I won't go any deeper than that, but quite a few of these animals were from that time period. Some are still with us and some are not. But the things that we have in common, if you don't think we have anything in common with the other mammals of the planet, is you can read as well as I can here some of the things that we all share, no matter what form you come in, that we have in common. People say, I don't see any body hair on whales, but you know, when they're newborns, you can see around their rostrum, their muzzle, and their mouth, there's lots of hairs. The bumps on the top there are all hair follicles. Okay, so historically we know there was hair growing there. Mostly when you see whales nowadays, they're covered with species-specific, barnacles, as well as callosities. They occur nowhere else on the planet but on that whale's back. That species is how specialized they are. So all these animals, if you read that down through, are mammals, and we share that in common. So, well, So let's take a few, look, when's the last time you saw one of these mountain goats? And where was that, sir?
Up at the gas case.
Where?
Off of, what was it, Blue Lake, off of Highway 20?
Oh yeah. So now you probably, some of you have been following the fact that because there was a huge body of botanical evidence in Olympic Park and a lot of plant lovers, that the politics were able to swing and say that mountain goats in Olympics were not native. They were introduced there. So now the big move is on our nickel, we've been flying, these goats to the Cascades where they're supposed to be more native. And so they're dropping them off in some of these locales. So here's quite a bunch here, a collection of them. There's the classic look that we like, except for the fellow that was hiking up Mount Angeles. And I have a picture. My friend has a white beard longer than the goats. They're both in the picture, right? But someone was hiking there and he was on the territory of that male and during the rut in fall. Not a good time to challenge male horned animals, right, on their territory. And as you can see, they can get pretty good size, more than I weigh, I know that, and they can run a lot faster too. So interestingly enough, with these hoofed animals, as you probably have observed, that they mate in the fall, and so the gestation period for hoofed animals is pretty long compared to, say, carnivores, excuse me. And so as we go into the spring, they'll be dropping their calves and their kids. Now I have, I don't know about you, do you hypothesize much? You should, because this connection between the kid and mom is an important one, and you thought those were just horns. No, that's actually, kind of a mouthpiece, to kind of get what you want. You start whispering things in mom's ears. What you want for Christmas or whatever, and you got your wish, and so you're gleeful. I love watching them jumping around. You remember the scene in the movie Babe, right?
Yeah.
Oh, right, where mom, right? She says how Babe saved us from the wolves. Remember that? It was so good. That's what it reminds me of right here. So they'll be shedding here as we go into the next couple months. It'll be a little too warm for all that keratinous material like your hair, your fingernails, like a bird's feather, all this fur that's super insulated them. If you look closely, we've got some cement here holding this stone guardrail together. So I'm curious what vantage this was drivable to that this mountain goat was at. So this animal has horns. Horns are ever growing and they aren't shed. Just to kind of collect our wagons, or our boats together in the same circle. Because a lot of folks don't differentiate well between antlers, right, which are shed, and horns that remain and continue to grow. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to pass my pop quiz, the final exam. When you look at these animals, I'll show you a close-up of their feet in a moment. They're pretty impressive. As a wannabe climber on rock, I've tried to do some of these things, and it's amazing what they can do. However, they usually don't tell you that they have broken teeth and broken antlers, bruised elbows. When you look at them up close, these animals do fall as well. But check this out. As far as moccasins, I think they had the original best ever. And I think Vibram tried to copy them. And the goat said, no way, we got the copyright on that. There's 200 different kinds of Vibram soles. You don't see them much anymore because they cost too much for the high-tech, Gore-Tex shoes. But the original organic shoe, the best. And here's a little cross-section. So you can see a little bit that rhomboid shape and that rubbery kind of inner sole. And actually some of these hoofed animals, when you think about caribou, that when they're walking on boggy areas, they can actually, increase the flow of blood to those feet, and they'll expand to make the foot larger. And then as we go into the fall and the winter, when there's ice forming and snow, they'll actually shrink that, and they'll have the harder edge for better purchase on the ice, which is pretty neat adaptation when you think about it. So you've got your handy tape out. So when you look at the shape of the mountain goat track, it's pretty unique. It's not as pointed, tipped, and curling in as, say, the deer in your backyard. We can see the dew claws showing here. It's got a unique shape to it here. And then a little subtler one with your metric rule out here on some soft dust and dirt. They love the salt, and maybe you've seen them in the winter come down to salt lick areas that are quite important for them. Am I going too fast or too slow? You can look this up online yourself, NatureServe. This would include all of North America, Central and South America, if we had the whole map and not just this cut section, which is really all we need because this is the only place mountain goats occur in North America. I haven't seen too many in the tropics. How about you? Maybe more of that hooch there. We can see more, right? So then nature mapping, right, is showing us appropriate habitat here. Doesn't mean that goats are necessarily in that habitat, but they've, analyzed all the different variables that have been plugged into this and show us where those are in terms of habitat. Here's some confirmed sightings of Eriemos americanus there. We want to have that information. But this again is where you can plug in because there's so much that's not known. When you take that picture and you have documentation and you got your GPS in your iPhone as well, you can really expand our knowledge. And we need, I think, as the world shrinks in terms of habitat, increases in our population, in our development, these areas need to have some continuity. If you start ending up with isolated islands, you end up with no gene flow whatsoever. And a backyard example is salamanders that are terrestrial up here in Seaholm Hill used to have a corridor down across the parkway into the 100-acre woods and down the interurban, and that's kind of been severed. So, you just won't see those animals having any connection with their kind, and that's difficult. I don't see my family too often in Michigan either, which is okay, I guess. What can we say just based on your knowledge and observations thus far? What do you notice about this animal here? First, is it a wapiti? Oh, that quieted them down. I like that. Or is it a Roosevelt elk? But the native people would call it a wapiti, right? And when you're out in the forest, off the trail and the brush is this high, all you see is a shoulder high buff boom boom going through the brush. And we didn't like them on Owl Crew because salmonberry, pretty soon they're in the rose family. They have those pink 5-petaled flowers on them. Well, we were putting pink flagging tape up to mark our transects for calling for spotted owls. Well, the elk would come along, browsing on the salmonberry leaves and eat the flagging tape as well. Oh no, where are we supposed to start at? So we had an interesting appeal, but very reddish tone here. So this is probably in the fall, and it's shed the velvet, right? It's been rubbing that off on various brush and whatever, your backyard trees. Very curious and listening very carefully, sniffing the air. These animals have 3 different scent glands right on their bodies, inner and outer parts of their legs, as well as on their hooves. Okay, so when you watch that black-tailed deer going through your backyard, scent tracking primarily. They're looking and listening too. Got to stay sharp if you're an elk, particularly in the Olympics. There's a good number of cougar there, but the scientists have actually found cougar skulls totally smashed in when the elk kicked them when he was coming up. Kicked him, smashed it, it was all over. Bye-bye cougar. So they fight back, of course. But I would encounter quite a bit, of them, especially off the trail. And you'd find those shed antlers up there at 3,600, 4,000 feet up there. And who knows? I remember some old trapper friends up in Marble Mount talking about in North Cascades National Park and how they saw the eye shine. That first image I had of the wolverine, eye shine. And they could see it in their campfire, the eye shine of the cougar just sitting there and watching them the whole time. Very interesting. It's a big animal. But of course, during the fall, the females all got to scatter because there's going to be some kind of interaction between this male and the one that's floating away there on the left side of the screen. So everybody's running, run away, run away. But so, what is it, 7, 8 months gestation here. And these animals are dropped literally, they fall out and their eyes are open, and within an hour, the little one is standing, within an hour. And that's necessary survival strategy because otherwise, I'm sure they get selected out. So it's pretty amazing. Boom, there they are up and at it. Beautiful animal, and we wish them well. So just comparing cattle on the right side and elk tracks on the left, in case you haven't. Look at that more cloven type of cattle shape, more like a goat would be, kind of a mountain goat would be somewhere in between. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Am I going too fast or too slow? Does anyone have any questions or any cute stories they want to share? Or not cute? They can either way. You're all good? Are you learning anything?
Yeah.
Do you want to leave yet? No, it's okay. I'll keep going a little bit more. You tell me when, okay? All right. Just checking in. So what's interesting is how many of you have driven down to the Cook Road exit to go into Steel Woolley, I call it, Steel Woolley, and then you go on up the Skagit River, right, on Highway 20. And in the fall through the winter, you can see elk there just before you get into Cement City. You've seen them on the right. There's a pull-off there for wildlife. Those are not Roosevelt elk. Those are Rocky Mountain elk that have been introduced here, okay? And a lot of the farmers in the valley, the Skagit Valley, I spent a lot of years there, don't like it because they'll just bull right through their fences and they'll pretty much go where they want to go. But that was created, and this is kind of what happens. I'll show you, I think we might get to Fisher, but the Fisher that have been introduced to Olympic National Park came from northern Alberta. So now, you know, Fisher are thought to have been here in the past, historically in the Olympics and beyond. Elk were in the Skagit Valley before, but now they're not. But you don't see them actually being able to expand their population outside the enclave of the Olympic Park, essentially, and along the periphery. So just to give you a little background on what's happening in terms of recreating. And generally, most of the public won't know. Oh, an elk is an elk is an elk. Who cares, right? It's interesting. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, hi.
We went to Cannon Beach in Oregon, and they're like all over the beach. And
Yeah.
in people's yards, the elk.
Right.
And I just wonder.
Well, and now I'm kind of curious that because when we go down to Point Reyes, we'll see the Thule elk, right? A different race, okay, or subspecies. So they are different populations, and they're not one and all the same. And sometimes when the cline, like this southern population, meets this cline of animals we're talking about right now, along that edge, you would then get what you could call a intergrade between the races or subspecies. It's not a true hybrid between two separate species, but that's beyond probably the general public's interest or knowledge. But that's kind of how it's being differentiated. But let's all gather our votes together and say that I think Darwin was correct. He said the species concept is mushy at best. Look around in this room. You're all unique individuals. We'd like to lump you myopically and you're all Homo sapiens, but that's about where the similarity ends, isn't it? Because you're all very diverse and very unique. And never forget that. On the planet, you are unique. So when we call them Columbian black-tailed deer in your backyards and beyond, cute little boogers unless they're eating your roses. But look at how much they vary here, okay? And there's one just to the north of us that's recognized, the Sitka black-tailed deer up in British Columbia. And this is, a lot of it is differentiated by these flags, very important in their visual signaling, you know, between them. As well as looking at their racks there of the males. You know, white-tailed deer I grew up with, and they're in eastern Washington, come off this single beam, all these tines, whereas in the black-tailed deers are really mule deer. That's what I want you to go home with, is basically they're all mule deer variants. See a little bit again here with the different shaped tails and antler patterns. But when we're all young, hey, we're innocent, aren't we? We don't even have an odor. Wouldn't you like to go back to just being Bambi? Wouldn't have to take a shower, wouldn't have anyone to have to impress, just be cute as all heck, you know, all the time. And then you grow up and you get bigger and, oh, whatever. Hey, so I want you to go home with another new expression. You see this pattern here? What's that called for your second pop quiz? If you get this, seriously, you can go. I'll go with you. That's called stotting. And you probably have seen it, maybe on television if you haven't seen it for real. But when the deer goes up with all four hooves, right? That's what it's called. That's stotting. It went real high. Remember, we see the dew claws when it comes down, but it's bounding and showing off. Stotting. You got it. Everyone got that? I don't see anyone taking. Oh, there's one person taking written notes. Yes. Yay! What is that? The club secretary? She asked to, right? Nice. Oh, you're doing other things. You're not even paying attention. I saw that. Caught you. I caught you. All right, just to show you that these hoofed animals are doing quite well up and down here, as we can see. But it'd be interesting to see what's the latest in terms of actually how many are called for sports activities each fall. And so you can see there's quite a bit of what's considered good habitat, which is amazing. When you do bird programs, other than specialists, the scablands, as we call them, this very dry, arid interior, usually doesn't have a whole lot of wildlife diversity. But mule deer are having no problems occupying that area. Oh, and one of my favorites, moose. How many of you were here in the early 1970s? Ooh, nobody. Nobody. Well, I was.
I would.
Oh, you were? Oh, okay, cool. Did you hear about the moose that was on Seaholm Hill?
That was not in the 70s.
You remember?
That was later.
Whoa, was it 60s?
No, it was like the 80s.
Oh, okay, whatever. But the way I like to tell the story is in the 70s. And where did that moose come from? Everyone assumes Canada, right? And probably that's the case. When I worked up at Ross Lake in North Cascades Park, we had them 2 or 3 times on Ross Lake, probably coming in from Canada. So they do occur, and that would be quite a sighting to see this large animal from, you know, the prehistoric days.
It fell in love with a cow in the county.
It fell in love with a cow in the county?
Yeah, it fell in love with a cow in the county.
She's had at least 2 glasses full.
No.
I sat at this table. I sat at this table.
She rejected him.
Oh, well, that was
And
good.
so he was dejected, and he went up on Seaholm Hill and hung out at Carl Nightblade's pond.
Wow, the story gets better all the time. Very good. And how big was the salmon? Nice. So usually a younger female moose have maybe one in their first year, and as they get a little older, they might have a couple here. And that's a pretty interesting relationship because, again, they've got to guard this. Last summer I was going across the country in my van with my partner, and we stopped. It was just getting dark by the river, and I looked out, and here was a moose. And it was walking through the river, looking over its shoulder. I'm going, what is it looking at? It was really staring. I thought it was maybe a predator it was concerned with. His ears were really focused. And then I finally got to see, as it was getting dark, there was, you know, a young mooselet there, a baby moose. And I thought, wow, this is so cool, but it's too dark to get pictures. I was, oh, bummer. When I woke up after sleeping in that spot, in the morning, they were still there. Both the mom and the little ones are like, wow, now there's much better light. So if you know your animals, and this is a huge multi-100-pound animal, this one's probably walking the mom, and the youngster is swimming behind, right? And they made it to the other side. The one I saw wasn't quite this large. This looks like a pouring rainstorm here. Ooh. How many of you have had this experience? You have? Wow. With a big male moose like this?
Female and calf.
Yeah, okay. But I don't know how close I would get with a big male like that with huge antlers. And they're taking pictures and everything, swimming along here. But anyway, you know, moose are a lot more intelligent than they used to be. I mean, chasing cattle, come on. So Mom, you know, you really have to watch. And I don't know how many of you love to get up at 3:34 in the morning, but to see these animals, that's our best, you know, time because we're not very well endowed for nocturnal sight. So if you're in there in the crepuscular zones, first thing in the morning and as it's getting, you know, dark in the evening is a great time to see wildlife along the roadways. And you might see the size difference in the males on the left and the females on the right. But here's an older track because you can see that's not too sharp on its definition. The side walls have fallen in and everything, but you can see the size of a moose track. I wrote a poem when I was at Isle Royale, and I called it Why Moose Don't Use the Boardwalk. Because they only had a 1x10 going through the bogs with all the showy lady slipper orchids, and the moose are just too wide, their straddle, to use the boardwalk. So. But there were wolf tracks going right down there, and the moose was straddling the boardwalk. And of course, as a long-legged animal, they're good at wading through the snow and the brush. And most of the folks, including indigenous hunters I've talked to, say you never hear a moose moving through, even heavy brush. They are so silent for such a massive animal, especially males with huge antlers. So, but this is not a position I would want to be in. And you know, so many people, they push the edge, and actually I think it creates a scenario that's not so good for that prize-winning photograph, you know, to get into space and to challenge an animal like this. I don't know how fast you are, but I know I'm not as fast as I used to be. And this animal can do, you know, 30, 40 miles per hour. How many of you can even do 20? I know I can't anymore, but the fastest humans only do about 20. So think twice. It's picturesque and it's beautiful, but you know, like I said, there's always, you know, options, right? So the smarter moose that I've become familiar with, you know, they like to trophy hunt too. And they got up really early to bag this hunter. And matter of fact, they were feeling so smug about it, they all were toting out a few beers and driving around the campground and showing off their trophy. Love this picture. All right, an area where you might find moose and breeding years year-round and winter range. I'm kind of curious about this winter range, you know, if it's some of these animals that move into that different zone there of Mexico. Bye-bye. So we've talked about the Seahome Hill moose, and then I've talked about them on Ross Lake, but in general, it's not considered in this nature mapping to have ideal habitat for moose on the west side of the Cascades. And certainly sightings have been documented in the northeastern corner. How many of you have been up here in this area? There's a caribou up there as well, and some novel bird species. It's quite different than the rest, not like doing the Cascade Loop or the Olympics, but quite beautiful up here in this area. Okay, how are we doing? I'm checking in with you. Do you want to do a little bit more?
Couple more minutes?
A few more minutes? Okay, just a little bit, just to look at some carnivore. I had some chicken tonight, it was good. Did you? I ate some dead bird, yeah, can you believe it? Oh, I'm sorry to let you down. So skunks used to be considered in the Musteletidae, right, the weasel family, but they have their own family now. The Felidae we mentioned, the Canidae, and then Ursidae. So I'll just maybe not talk as much, but move through this a little bit so we enjoy some pretty pictures, and you can then have nice, you know, dreams tonight about big sharp teeth. And imagine the saber-toothed tiger. It had even more massive teeth for, you know, hunting mastodon and mammoth here in this northwest area. But cougars are pretty impressive, and never shortchange them because they can move fast. And they're studying things always, huh? Yeah. You know, they're pretty free-ranging too. They have massive, you know, ranges that they move around, and if they're running into scent posts of other males, then they might get driven out by the more dominant animal or take over. So it's kind of a fluid boundary. Imagine doing that. Wow. That's some jumping there.
It's interesting how many different names they have.
Oh yeah. So let's see it as a group, how many we can get. Vic's got one. What is it?
Catamount.
Catamount, that was the one I was going to say. Cougar, that's
Puma.
2. Puma, 3.
Mountain lion.
Mountain lion, 4.
Golden lion.
Which?
Golden lion.
Golden lion? Okay, 5. All right, cool. Anyone else have any extras? I've heard them called painters as well. 6. So that's quite a few different names, right? Colloquial names from around the region and the world for this animal. We talked about this a little bit earlier, the comparison of the tracks. And then we throw in a bobcat on the far left and mountain lion on the far right, and then a couple dogs in the middle. Your dog, right, will probably in most cases have a more round foot than a more elongate coyote track. Have you noticed that in your studies of coyote tracks? Well, I guess not. Okay. So cougars, you know, are being seen increasingly. I mean, they've been not only Seahome Hill, but down in Colony Mountain. We had one swimming in Whatcom Lake here a couple years ago. and then others have been seen as well. So they're about. They're about.
Yes.
Plenty of good habitat from the professional's perspective. Sightings here and there. And apparently, though, their population seems to be on the decline. And I don't know if we get closer in the last 5 years, if it's oscillating back up or not. This is, kind of interesting. I worked on a 7-year project, the Breeding Bird Atlas, and we basically were trying to cover the southeast quarter of each county, or what's the township, and you saw very quickly after 5 years that birds are where you find them. So there were birds where people went and saw and listened and detected them, but where people didn't go, there was no birds. Have you noticed that? I suspect they were there, but no one wanted to go up the side of the mountain, so there's no birds there. So I think it's similar to this. And again, if you don't share your information with the right people, no one will ever know. How many of you have been surprised to find while you've been sitting somewhere studying Merlin falcons? I sat for, like I told you last time, maybe 6 to 15 hours some days. And so you kind of become part of the terrain. And I've had bobcat come in, walking in, almost on my person. They, because I was just sitting there in my green colors, barely, staying awake for that many hours sitting. I'm kind of a wound up guy, aren't I? And bobcat were right there. And they were studying as well. And then finally, maybe they detect something. They're big on catching rabbits, right? Hares, etc. And you'll find them sometimes on nature trails you walked. Maybe you've never seen, but then you find out, oh yeah, I get up there at 3:30, 4 a.m. and I found bobcat, and they have a den right there with young ones, and it's like 50 feet from where you've been walking your dog or your cat for years, right there. So here we see it picked off a rabbit here, a lagomorph.
Here it is.
They like to, they don't use logs too often, but they can. And remember that each night, if you're a free-roaming animal, you probably will have a different bivouac site. But then in the breeding season, then you might have a specific site. Usually, again, in riparian upland forest interface. And of course, that felid track, right, not showing any claws at this point. Did you know that sea otters actually have retractable claws too? A lot of people don't realize that. How about that? So I think you probably have got this memorized very well. I'll just show you a few more here. So I've walked literally miles, like on the Boga Shield and some of the other trails on the West Olympic side, and there's the pretty wide trail. Maybe it was partly a logging road on the approach, and having bobcat tracks and cougar tracks for multiple kilometers, just going down the trail just like I was. Very cool to think that they were there too. One time I skied in March over Cascade Pass down the other side, and I put my little tent up, and it was right there on cougar tracks. Yeah, right there. So pretty widespread to find bobcat around the country. And we got to complete, probably with raccoons, right? So, do they really like to wash their food all the time before they eat it?
Yes.
Yeah? And apparently they're pretty sensory. Some people have suggested that they wash their hands so they can feel things better, right? So they're very tactile animal, as we know. And pound for pound, I would pick the raccoon in a fight with a dog every time.
Yeah.
I lost my neighbor, or my housemate, back when I lived on the Parkway. He had a medium-sized dog, which was no slouch. But the raccoon and the dog met in the culvert, and when you saw the dog, you were sorry for it because you didn't think it was going to live. A cornered raccoon, pound for pound, I would bet on the raccoon. I have a skull right up here too. It's missing a couple of canine teeth, but you can see a small individual right there. So while you and I are walking on the trail, or thinking, oh, I got to get to this shopping center or whatever, raccoons will be up there, kind of, I call it playing lizard day, and they'll be laying maybe on a big wide branch, and their legs will be hanging down. They'll be up there snoozing. Sometimes the crows. I find more owls and other interesting species by just listening to birds agitating. when they're, going off and they're kind of central in a certain location, you work yourself around and you can usually find a porthole up there to see that animal, whether it's an owl, raccoon, or whatever. But I listen to the other animals and they're trying to encourage it out of their space. So always sensing using those, is that a good ending spot? All right, thank you very much.